The USS Defiant moved through the darkness of space like a silver needle, threading through black cloth. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair and watched the main screen show nothing but stars and the distant glow of Kepler 442. The system was supposed to be empty. The survey report said no intelligent life existed within 20 light-years of this place. Morrison had read those reports 3 times before accepting this mission. Now he wondered if someone had made a mistake. Lieutenant Amy Brooks stood at the tactical station with her fingers moving across the holographic controls. She was young for her rank, but Morrison had never met anyone better at reading sensor data. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes never left her displays. She frowned and tapped the screen twice. Morrison noticed the gesture. Amy only did that when something bothered her. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of systems and the occasional beep from a console. Nathan Pierce was down in engineering running diagnostics on the plasma conduits. Dr. Helen Carter was in medical bay doing inventory. The rest of the crew of 180 souls went about their duties with the calm efficiency that came from months in deep space. They were 3 weeks into a 2-month survey mission and everyone had settled into their routines. Morrison was about to ask Amy what was wrong when she spoke first. Her voice was steady, but he heard the edge in it. She had found something and it was not good. The sensors had picked up energy signatures near the gas giant on the far side of the system. Amy expanded the display and Morrison leaned forward. The signatures were not natural. They were power plants, big ones. At least a dozen of them were hiding in the shadow of the massive planet where normal scans would miss them. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. The Defiant was alone out here. The nearest human ship was 2 weeks away at maximum speed. He ordered Amy to go to yellow alert. The lighting on the bridge shifted to amber, and throughout the ship crew members stopped what they were doing and moved to their stations. Morrison opened a channel to engineering and told Nathan to stand by for possible combat maneuvers. Nathan did not ask questions. He just acknowledged, and Morrison heard him start barking orders to his team. The ships emerged from behind the gas giant like predators stepping out of shadows. 12 warships, each 3 times the size of the Defiant, spread out in a standard attack formation. Morrison recognized their design immediately. They were Talcor vessels. The reptilian species had signed a peace treaty with humanity 6 months ago. Morrison had attended the ceremony on Earth and shaken hands with their ambassador. Now their warships were here in human space and they were powering up weapons. Amy confirmed what Morrison already knew. All 12 ships had active targeting systems, and they were locked onto the Defiant. She ran the numbers quickly and looked up at him with worry in her eyes. The Defiant had good shields and decent weapons, but they were an exploration vessel, not a warship. Against 1 Talcor cruiser they might hold their own. Against 12 they would last maybe 5 minutes. The communication system crackled and a face appeared on the main screen. The Talcor war leader called himself Kreshitar, and he looked exactly like the videos Morrison had seen during first contact briefings. Scales the color of old bronze covered his face and his eyes were yellow with vertical slits for pupils. When he spoke, his voice came through the translator with a rough growling quality that made every word sound like a threat. Kreshitar did not waste time with pleasantries. He told Morrison to surrender the Defiant immediately. The crew would be taken prisoner, and the ship would be seized for study. If Morrison refused, then the Talcor fleet would destroy them. Kreshitar explained that the peace treaty had been a mistake. The Talcor Confederation had watched humanity spread through space too quickly. They had watched human ships explore and human colonies grow. They had decided that humanity would become a threat in the future. So they would eliminate that threat now while humans were still weak. Morrison kept his face blank while Kreshitar talked. Inside his mind was racing. This was not a random attack. The Talcor had planned this. They had positioned their fleet here knowing a human ship would come through on survey duty. This was the opening move of a war. If the Defiant was destroyed, no one would know what happened until it was too late. If the Defiant was captured, the Talcor would learn about human weapons and tactics and defenses. Either way, more humans would die. He looked at Amy and saw her waiting for orders. He looked at the other bridge crew and saw the same thing. Fear, yes, but also determination. They knew the odds. They knew what surrender would mean. Morrison had served in space for 20 years, and he had learned one truth that never changed. Sometimes you had to fight even when you could not win. Sometimes making the enemy pay a price was more important than survival. Morrison told Kreshitar that the Defiant would not surrender. He said it calmly, like he was declining an invitation to dinner. Kreshitar seemed surprised. He blinked his yellow eyes and his scales rippled in what might have been confusion. He asked Morrison if he understood the situation. 12 warships against 1 scout vessel. Destruction was certain. Resistance was pointless, Morrison smiled. It was not a happy smile. He told Kreshitar that he understood perfectly. Then he told Amy to load all weapons and prepare evasive maneuvers. He told her to target the lead cruiser and wait for his command. Amy's fingers flew across her controls and Morrison heard the hum of railguns charging. The sound was almost comforting. At least they would go down fighting. Kreshitar's face twisted in anger. His scales darkened and his eyes seemed to glow brighter. He cut the communication without another word. On the tactical display, Morrison watched the Talcor fleet begin to move. They were spreading out to surround the Defiant. They were taking their time. They thought this would be easy. Morrison gripped the arms of his chair and watched the enemy ships close in. He had one advantage and he was going to use it. The Talcor had never actually fought humans before. They had watched from a distance and made assumptions. They thought they knew how humans would react. They thought humans would be like all the other species they had conquered. Weak, predictable, afraid. They were about to learn different. Morrison had grown up on Earth in the ruins of the old wars. He had studied history and he knew what his species was capable of when cornered. Humans did not surrender easily. Humans did not go quietly into the dark. And humans had a nasty habit of doing the unexpected. He gave the order. The Defiant's engines flared to full power, and the ship dove toward the nearby planet. Amy fired the railguns and Morrison felt the deck shudder under his feet. On the screen, he saw 2 Talcor cruisers light up with impact flashes. The fight had begun and there was no turning back now. The Defiant dropped toward Kepler 442b like a stone falling into a well. The planet was a gas giant with thick orange clouds and storms that had raged for thousands of years. Morrison had plotted their course to skim the upper atmosphere, where the gases were dense enough to scatter energy weapons, but thin enough that the ship could still maneuver. It was dangerous and stupid and exactly the kind of thing the Talcor would not expect. Amy Brooks held onto her console as the ship shook from the rapid descent. Her screen showed 12 enemy contacts moving to intercept, but they were hesitating. The Talcor ships slowed their approach and broke formation. Morrison watched them spread out and he knew what they were thinking. Why would the humans fly so close to the planet? It had to be a trick. There had to be a trap. There was no trap. Morrison was just gambling that the Talcor valued their expensive warships more than they wanted to destroy one human vessel. He was right. The enemy fleet circled above them, but did not follow into the atmosphere. Plasma bolts streaked down from the Talcor guns, but the shots scattered and dissipated in the thick air. The orange clouds lit up with green fire as the energy weapons discharged harmlessly. Morrison opened a channel to engineering and asked Nathan how much power they had to spare. Nathan's voice came back strained and breathing hard. He was manually rerouting systems because the automatic controls could not keep up with Morrison's flying. He said he could give them maybe 30 seconds of full weapons power, but after that they would be running on emergency reserves. 30 seconds was enough. Morrison told Amy to pick her targets carefully. He brought the Defiant up out of the atmosphere in a sharp climb that made his vision tunnel and his inner ear scream. The ship burst through the cloud layer directly beneath 2 Talcor cruisers. The enemy vessels were caught completely off guard. They had been watching the clouds waiting for the human ship to emerge somewhere else. Amy did not waste the moment. She fired everything the Defiant had. Railguns hammered out solid slugs of tungsten carbide at a significant fraction of light speed. Missile tubes spat out 6 warheads that locked onto their targets and accelerated hard. Point defense lasers swept across the nearest cruiser's hull, cutting through sensor arrays and communication dishes. The barrage lasted 4 seconds, and in that time the Defiant turned 2 Talcor warships into crippled wrecks. The railgun slugs punched through the enemy shields like they were paper. The Talcor had designed their defenses to stop energy weapons, and their shields were optimized for dispersing heat. They had never faced kinetic weapons before. The tungsten slugs hit armor plating at velocities that turned solid metal into plasma. Holes appeared in the hulls of both cruisers. Atmosphere vented into space in white plumes. One ship listed to the side as its engines failed. The other spun slowly with its bow crumpled inward. Morrison did not wait to see the results. He pushed the Defiant into a roll and dove back toward the planet. More plasma fire lit up the space around them, but now the Talcor were shooting wild. They were angry and confused. Two of their ships were burning and the human vessel was still flying. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The communication system crackled again and Kreshtar's face appeared. The war leader was no longer calm. His scales had darkened to almost black and his eyes blazed with fury. He roared something in his own language that the translator could not process. Then he switched back to the common tongue and his words were sharp with rage. He called Morrison a coward. He said humans had no honor. He said the Defiant would be hunted down and torn apart piece by piece. Morrison cut the transmission without responding. He did not have time for speeches. The tactical display showed the remaining 10 Talcor ships abandoning their careful formation. They were accelerating hard in pursuit. Kreshtar had stopped thinking tactically and started thinking emotionally. That was good. Angry enemies made mistakes. The Defiant raced away from the planet with the enemy fleet close behind. Morrison checked their course and saw what he was looking for. The asteroid belt that ringed the inner system was 30 minutes away at current speed. It was dense and chaotic and full of rocks the size of buildings tumbling through space. It was also the perfect place for a smaller ship to disappear. Nathan's voice came over the intercom. He reported damage to the portside hull plating and one of the main power couplings was running hot. 2 crew members in engineering had been injured when a plasma bolt grazed the ship's flank. Dr. Helen Carter was already on her way to treat them. Nathan said they could maintain current speed, but if they had to fight again, they would be at reduced weapons capacity. Morrison acknowledged and told him to do what he could. He knew the ship was hurt. He could feel it in the way the Defiant responded to his commands. There was a sluggishness that had not been there before, but they were still flying and the enemy was still chasing, and that meant they still had a chance. Amy reported that the Talcor fleet was gaining. Their ships were bigger and faster in open space. She estimated 20 minutes until they were in weapons range. Morrison did not respond. He was watching the asteroid belt grow larger on the main screen. They would make it with time to spare. Barely. The bridge crew worked in silence. Everyone knew what was about to happen. They were going to fly into a field of tumbling rocks while being chased by 10 warships. The statistical probability of survival was not good. But no one complained. No one suggested surrender. They had all volunteered for deep space duty and they all knew the risks. More importantly, they all knew what the Talcor would do if they won. The enemy would study the Defiant and learn human weaknesses. Then they would attack the colonies. Millions of humans would die. That could not be allowed to happen. Morrison thought about his family back on Earth. His sister lived in New Seattle with her 2 kids. His parents were retired in the Arizona desert. They had all been so proud when he made captain. He wondered if they would ever know what happened out here. Probably not. The Defiant would just be listed as lost in deep space, missing and presumed destroyed. Another ship that went out and never came back. He pushed the thoughts away. Emotions were dangerous right now. He needed to focus. The asteroid belt was close. He could see individual rocks now. Some were small like cars. Others were massive like mountains. They spun and tumbled in complex patterns driven by the gravity of the distant sun and the pull of nearby planets. Flying through it would require constant attention and perfect reflexes. One wrong move and they would be smashed to atoms. Amy counted down the distance. 5 minutes 4-3. The Talcor fleet was firing now even though they were still out of effective range. Plasma bolts flashed past the Defiant, but Morrison did not waste energy on evasive maneuvers. He was saving everything for the belt. 2 minutes. Morrison's hands were steady on the controls. He had trained for this. Every pilot in the human fleet practiced asteroid field navigation in simulators. But simulations were different from reality. In a simulator, you could reset if you made a mistake. Out here, mistakes meant death. 1 minute. The first asteroids flashed past. Small ones no bigger than a house. Morrison threaded the Defiant between them and pushed deeper into the belt. Behind them, the Talcor fleet followed. Kreshtar was not going to let them escape. His pride demanded that he finish this hunt. The asteroids grew thicker. Morrison flew by instinct now. His eyes tracked multiple rocks at once while his hands made constant tiny adjustments to their course. The Defiant twisted and rolled through gaps that seemed too small. Metal scraped on metal as they clipped a spinning boulder. Alarms blared, but Morrison ignored them. He was in the zone now. Nothing existed except the ship and the rocks and the empty spaces between. The Talcor ships entered the belt behind them, and immediately 2 of them collided with asteroids. The enemy vessels were too large and too slow to navigate the dense field. Morrison watched on the tactical display as one cruiser smashed into a tumbling rock the size of a city block. The ship's bow crumpled and it spun off trailing debris. Another cruiser tried to stop too quickly and was rear-ended by the ship behind it. Both vessels tangled together and fell out of formation. 8 ships left. Still impossible odds, but better than 10. Morrison allowed himself a tight smile. The Talcor were learning that chasing humans was harder than it looked. The asteroid belt was a maze of death spinning through empty space. Morrison pushed the Defiant through gaps that would have seemed impossible from outside, but felt merely insane from the pilot's seat. Behind them, 8 Talcor warships followed with less grace and more determination. They smashed through smaller rocks and dodged around larger ones. Their shields flared bright as debris bounced off their hulls. They were built tough and they were learning fast. Amy Brooks divided her attention between navigation sensors and targeting systems. She had a new idea and she needed Morrison's approval before she tried it. The Defiant's point defense lasers were designed to shoot down incoming missiles, but they could also be used on other targets, like asteroids. If she calculated the angle correctly, she could fracture a rock and send the pieces spinning into the path of pursuing ships. Morrison told her to try it. They needed every advantage they could create. Amy locked onto a house-sized boulder tumbling 20 degrees to starboard. She fired a 3-second burst from the port laser array. The coherent light cut into the asteroid like a knife into soft cheese. Cracks spread across the surface. The rock broke apart into 7 large chunks that scattered in different directions. 2 of those chunks slammed into a Talcor cruiser. The first piece hit the ship's flank and staggered it sideways. The second piece caught it while it was off balance and crushed the rear quarter of the hull. The cruiser's engines died and it began a slow tumble. Internal fires lit up the viewports in orange. The ship was out of the fight. 7 enemies left. Amy immediately began targeting another asteroid. This time she aimed for a smaller rock closer to the pursuing fleet. The laser carved it into fragments and 3 pieces found targets. One Talcor destroyer took a glancing blow that tore away its communication array. Another ship swerved to avoid the debris and clipped a different asteroid. Damage was minor, but it bought the Defiant more distance. Morrison could hear Nathan's voice over the intercom coordinating damage control teams throughout the ship. They had hull breaches on 3 decks. Environmental systems were struggling to maintain pressure. The medical bay was full of injured crew members and Dr. Helen Carter was working with barely any rest. The Defiant was holding together through determination and engineering skill, but it could not last forever. Kreshtar's voice crackled over the communication system again. The war leader's rage had cooled into something colder and more dangerous. He spoke slowly and clearly. He told Morrison that the Talcor fleet could stay in the asteroid belt for weeks if necessary. The Defiant would run out of power or life support eventually, surrender now and the crew would be treated according to military law, continue fighting and there would be no mercy. Morrison muted the channel without responding. Kreshtar was trying to get inside his head. The war leader was right about one thing, though. The Defiant could not run forever. They needed to either escape completely or reduce the enemy numbers further. Morrison checked their position and started forming a plan. It was desperate and dangerous, but everything about this situation was desperate and dangerous. The asteroid belt had a center where the rocks were most dense. Navigation computers marked it as a no-fly zone because the probability of collision approached certainty. No sane pilot would go there. Morrison adjusted course directly toward it. Amy saw what he was doing and looked at him with wide eyes. She asked if he was sure. Morrison said no, but they were going anyway. The density of asteroids increased. Now there were more rocks than empty space. Morrison flew on pure instinct. His hands moved faster than conscious thought. The Defiant twisted through impossible angles. Metal screamed as they scraped past boulders with centimeters of clearance. Alarms were constant. The crew held onto anything solid and tried not to look at the screens showing the chaos outside. Behind them, the Talcor fleet slowed. Even Kreshtar's rage had limits. 3 of his ships broke off rather than follow into the densest part of the belt. They circled around trying to find another angle of approach. But 4 ships stayed on the Defiant's tail. The war leader's cruiser and 3 others pushed forward into the storm of rocks. One of the pursuing destroyers died when it hit a spinning asteroid dead center. The rock was the size of a small moon, and it did not care about shields or armor. The destroyer crumpled like tinfoil. Its reactor breached and a small sun bloomed in the darkness. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. It vaporized nearby asteroids and sent shockwaves through the belt. Morrison rode the pressure wave and used it to gain speed. 3 enemies left in immediate pursuit, 3 more circling outside the dense zone. Morrison's arms ached from the constant adjustments to keep the ship flying. His eyes burned from staring at the screens. But he could not stop, not yet. Not while the Talcor were still hunting them. Amy destroyed another pursuing ship with her asteroid trick. She targeted a massive boulder and cut it at just the right angle. The rock split and fell apart directly into the path of a Talcor cruiser. The enemy ship tried to dodge, but it was too slow and too large. Debris hammered into its bow. The forward shield generators overloaded. More impacts followed, and the cruiser's nose crumpled inward. It fell back, trailing atmosphere and wreckage. 2 ships left in pursuit. Kreshtar's flagship and 1 escort. The war leader was not giving up. Morrison could respect that even while he worked to destroy him. In another life, they might have been friends. Both were warriors. Both understood duty, but this was not another life, and only one of them was going to survive this day. Nathan reported that the main reactor was running dangerously hot. They had been pushing maximum power for too long. He could keep it stable for maybe another hour, but after that they would need to shut down and make repairs. Morrison acknowledged. An hour might be enough, or it might not be. The Defiant burst out of the densest part of the asteroid belt into a relatively clear zone. Morrison immediately changed course and accelerated hard. The 2 pursuing ships followed. They were damaged and slower than before, but still dangerous. Kreshtar's flagship fired a barrage of plasma bolts. Most missed, but 2 hit the Defiant's rear shields. The barriers flared and held, but they were weakening. Amy returned fire with the railguns. Their ammunition was running low and her shots had to count. She targeted the escort ship and walked her fire across its hull. Tungsten slugs punched through armor plating. The destroyer's shields flickered and failed. 1 slug hit something critical and the ship exploded in a brief flash. Debris scattered in all directions. 1 enemy left. Kreshtar's flagship limped after them alone. The war leader had started this battle with 12 ships and now he commanded only 1. His vessel was scarred and burning, but he was not retreating. Morrison understood. Kreshtar could not go home with this failure. His honor demanded that he finish the hunt or die trying. Morrison checked the tactical display. The 3 Talcor ships that had circled around were converging on their position. They would arrive in 15 minutes. That gave him a narrow window. He could either try to lose Kreshtar in the asteroid belt and hope to escape before the other ships caught up. Or he could try something else. Something insane. He looked at the navigation display and saw Kepler 442 burning in the distance. The star was an orange dwarf smaller and cooler than Earth's sun, but still hot enough to melt any ship that got too close. Ships had heat shields designed to handle stellar radiation at safe distances. They were not designed for close approaches to a star's corona. Morrison asked Amy to pull up the technical specifications for Talcor vessels. She did, and he studied them carefully. The enemy ships used plasma-based weapons and shields. Both systems generated enormous amounts of heat. That heat had to be radiated away, using cooling systems designed for the cold of space. If those systems were overwhelmed, the ships would cook from the inside. Amy realized what he was thinking. She pulled up their own ship specifications. The Defiant had been designed for exploration, including planetary surveys. Human engineers had built in redundant heat management systems because human worlds varied widely in temperature. The ship could operate in environments that would overheat more specialized vessels. But there were limits. Get too close to a star and even the Defiant would burn. Morrison made his decision. He plotted a course toward Kepler 442. Amy protested. She said the heat would kill them. Morrison agreed but said it would kill the Talcor first. Nathan's voice came over the intercom asking if the captain had lost his mind. Morrison said probably, but they were out of options. Dr. Helen Carter said nothing. She just started preparing the medical bay for heat casualties. The Defiant turned toward the star and accelerated. Kreshtar's flagship followed. The war leader saw the human ship's course and his confusion was obvious even across species. Why would the humans fly toward the star? It was suicide. Unless it was another trick. Kreshtar hesitated, but only for a moment. He had come too far to stop now. His ship followed the Defiant toward the orange glow of Kepler 442. The three circling Talcor vessels saw their leader's course change and moved to intercept. They did not understand what was happening, but they knew their war leader needed support. All four enemy ships converged on the Defiant as Morrison led them toward the fire. The star grew larger on the main screen. Kepler 442 was an orange dwarf that burned with less intensity than Sol, but it was still a massive fusion reactor that could vaporize any ship foolish enough to approach too closely. Morrison watched the temperature readings climb as they dove toward it. The outer hull was already heating up. In 10 minutes they would enter the corona. In 20 minutes they would be dead unless his plan worked. Nathan's voice was steady despite what had to be terror. He reported that he was rerouting all non-essential power to the heat shields and cooling systems. Life support was reduced to minimum. Internal temperature was rising, but still manageable. The crew had broken out emergency heat suits designed for fire suppression. They would help, but only for a while. Nathan estimated they could survive maybe 30 minutes inside the corona before systems failed. Catastrophically, Amy Brooks wiped sweat from her forehead and kept tracking the four Talcor ships following them. Kreshtar's flagship was closest. The three other cruisers were converging from different angles trying to cut off any escape route. They were all moving more slowly now. Morrison could see them hesitating. The Talcor were realizing something was wrong, but they had not figured out what yet. The temperature climbed. Morrison could feel it even through the climate controls. The bridge air was hot and getting hotter. His uniform stuck to his skin. Around him, the crew worked through discomfort without complaint. They trusted him even though he was leading them into hell. That trust was a heavy weight, but Morrison carried it. He had no choice. This was command. This was duty. Dr. Helen Carter's voice came over the intercom. She reported 3 crew members down with heat exhaustion. She had them on cooling blankets and intravenous fluids. More would follow as the temperature increased. She was preparing as many beds as possible. Her voice was calm and professional, but Morrison heard the strain underneath. Helen knew what was coming. They all knew. The Defiant crossed into the star's outer corona. Space became a soup of superheated plasma. The view screen filtered the glare, but Morrison could still see the angry orange light of the sun's atmosphere. Temperature readings spiked. Alarms screamed. The ship's AI warned that they were exceeding safe operating parameters. Morrison overrode the warnings and pushed deeper. Behind them, Kreshitar's flagship followed. Morrison had been right about Talcor psychology. The war leader could not let the humans escape. His honor was bound up in destroying the Defiant. He would follow them into death if that was what it took. But the other 3 Talcor ships were breaking off. Their captains had more sense than their leader. They recognized suicide when they saw it. 3 contacts on the tactical display curved away from the star and accelerated back toward safe space. That left only Kreshtar. 1 enemy ship against 1 human vessel. Equal numbers at last, but the war leader still had advantages. His flagship was larger and more heavily armed. If they fought in open space, the Defiant would lose. But they were not in open space. They were in the corona of a star, and Morrison was gambling everything on human engineering, being better than Talcor engineering. The temperature climbed past dangerous into lethal. Nathan reported cooling system strain at 90%. The redundant backups were kicking in, but they would not last long. Hull plating on the starboard side was beginning to soften. Internal temperature was 45 degrees and rising. Crew members were collapsing. Dr. Helen Carter and her medical team were overwhelmed. But the ship was still flying. Morrison checked the readings from Kreshitar's flagship. The Talcor vessel was suffering worse. Its plasma-based shields were designed to stop incoming energy, but that same technology made them vulnerable to external heat. The shields were absorbing thermal radiation from the star and feeding it back into the ship's systems. The enemy cruiser was cooking itself. Kreshtar realized the trap too late. His ship began losing systems. Morrison watched on sensors as the Talcor weapons went offline first. The plasma cannons overheated and shut down automatically. Then the shields flickered and failed. Without shields, the hull was exposed directly to the corona. Metal began to glow red, then white. The Talcor flagship was dying, but Kreshtar would not retreat. Pride or honor or simple stubbornness kept him driving forward. His ship launched missiles in a last desperate attack, conventional chemical rockets that did not rely on the overheated plasma systems. 6 warheads streaked toward the Defiant, leaving trails of fire in the dense corona atmosphere. Amy's point defense lasers shot down 4 of them. The 5th detonated close enough that the shock wave rattled the ship. The 6th got through and hit the Defiant's port side. The explosion tore a hole in the hull 10 meters across. Atmosphere vented into space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the damaged section. Alarms howled. Morrison felt the ship shudder like a living thing in pain. Nathan reported casualties. 7 crew members had been in the damaged section. 5 made it to safety before the bulkheads closed. 2 were lost. Morrison added their names to the list he was keeping in his head. 12 dead now. 12 people who had trusted him and died because of his decisions. He would mourn them later if he survived. Right now he had to finish this. The internal temperature reached 50 degrees. Crew members were passing out despite the heat suits and emergency cooling. Dr. Helen Carter collapsed at her station. Her assistant dragged her to a cooling blanket and took over the medical duties. Morrison's vision swam. His hands felt numb, but he kept flying. The controls responded sluggishly, but they responded. The Defiant was still alive. Kreshtar's flagship was not. Morrison watched the enemy vessel lose all power. Its engines died. Its lights went out. The great warship became a dark hulk tumbling slowly in the stellar wind. The heat had killed its systems, and now it was falling toward the star. Morrison could have left it there. The crew would die in minutes as their life support failed, but he needed to be sure. He needed Kreshtar dead, so the war leader could not report what had happened here. Amy asked if she should fire on the derelict. Morrison hesitated. It felt like murder to shoot a helpless ship, but this was war. He gave the order. Amy locked the last of their railgun ammunition onto the Talcor flagship and fired. Tungsten slugs hammered into the dark hull. The ship broke apart. Debris scattered and began the long fall toward the star's surface. Kreshtar was gone. Morrison turned the Defiant away from the star. The ship responded slowly. Systems were failing, but they were moving. They were escaping. He pointed them toward open space and watched the temperature readings start to drop. Not quickly. Not enough. But it was something. The 3 Talcor ships that had retreated earlier were waiting at the edge of the corona. Morrison saw them on the tactical display and his heart sank. They had pulled back but not left. They were watching to see what emerged from the star. Now they saw the Defiant limping away and they began to move. 3 against 1. The Defiant had no ammunition, no missiles. Shields at 10%. Hull breached. Half the crew unconscious from heat. It was over. Amy said she could try the lasers. They still had power for point defense. It would not be enough to stop 3 cruisers, but they could fight. Morrison prepared to give the order. Then something happened that changed everything. The 3 Talcor ships were not moving to attack. They were moving away. They were leaving the system. Morrison stared at the tactical display, trying to understand. Why would they retreat? The Defiant was helpless, then he understood. The 3 enemy captains had watched what happened. They had seen one human ship destroy or cripple an entire Talcor fleet. They had watched Kreshtar's flagship die. They had witnessed something impossible, and they were afraid. Not of the Defiant specifically, of what the Defiant represented, of what humans would do when cornered. The 3 captains were going home to report that attacking humanity was a terrible mistake. Morrison slumped in his chair. The immediate danger was over. Now they just had to survive long enough to get home. Nathan reported that he could restore partial life support, but the main reactor needed to shut down for repairs. They would be running on emergency power. That meant no faster than light travel. They would have to limp back to human space on conventional drives. It would take weeks, maybe months, if they lasted that long. Dr. Helen Carter revived and immediately got back to work treating the injured. The medical bay was full. Crew members were packed into every available space. Some injuries were minor, others were critical. The heat had taken a toll, but they were alive. Against impossible odds, they were alive. Morrison opened a channel to the entire ship. His voice was hoarse from the heat and exhaustion, but he spoke clearly. He told the crew what they had accomplished. 1 human vessel against an entire enemy fleet. They had won. Not through superior firepower or numbers, but through determination and courage and the refusal to give up. He told them they were heroes. Every one of them. And he meant it. The Defiant drifted through space like a wounded animal limping home. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at Kepler 442. 3 weeks of emergency repairs and rationed supplies and constant vigilance in case the Talcor returned. They never did. The surviving enemy ships had fled back to their own territory and left the humans alone. Morrison spent those weeks wondering if that was mercy or strategy. Nathan Pierce had worked miracles keeping the ship functional. He and his engineering team slept in shifts when they slept at all. They patched hull breaches with salvaged plating. They rerouted power through damaged conduits. They coaxed the reactor into producing just enough energy to maintain life support and basic propulsion. The Defiant would never be beautiful again, but it would fly. That was enough. Dr. Helen Carter moved through the medical bay checking on patients. 47 crew members had been seriously injured during the battle. Most would recover. Some would need extensive treatment at a proper hospital. 3 more had died in the week since from complications. 15 total casualties. 15 names that Morrison repeated to himself every night before he tried to sleep. 15 families who would receive notifications that their loved ones were gone. The bridge crew had rotated through shifts to give everyone rest, but Morrison spent most of his time in the command chair. He could not shake the feeling that relaxing for even a moment would invite disaster. Amy Brooks finally convinced him to sleep by threatening to drug his coffee. He managed 4 hours before the nightmares woke him. In his dreams, he saw Kreshtar's flagship falling into the star. He saw the Talcor crew dying in the heat. He told himself it was war. He told himself he had no choice. But the dreams did not stop. On the 21st day after the battle, the communication system crackled to life. Morrison sat up straight, expecting trouble. Instead, a human voice came through speaking formal military protocol. The battle cruiser Alexander had detected the Defiant's distress beacon. They were en route to provide assistance. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Relief washed over Morrison so strongly that his hands shook. They were going to make it home. The Alexander arrived with a full escort of 3 destroyers. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the battle cruiser, and her first action was to dispatch medical teams to the Defiant. Doctors and supplies transferred over within the hour. The seriously injured were evacuated to the Alexander's advanced medical facilities. Engineering crews swarmed over the damaged hull and began proper repairs. For the first time in weeks, Morrison felt like he could breathe. Captain Grant asked for a full report. Morrison told her everything. The ambush. The fighting through the asteroid belt. The desperate dive into the star's corona. The destruction of the Talcor fleet. Grant listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat back and studied him with an expression Morrison could not read. Finally, she told him that intelligence reports confirmed the Talcor Confederation was in chaos. War leader Kreshtar had been a prominent military figure. His death and the destruction of his fleet had created a political crisis. The 3 surviving captains had told their story, and now every Talcor leader knew what one human ship could do. Morrison asked if that meant war. Grant said no. It meant the opposite. The Talcor High Council had sent an urgent message requesting a formal peace summit. Not a treaty. Not an agreement. A plea for peace. They had planned to test humanity's strength with a quick strike. Instead, they had learned that humans were more dangerous than they imagined. Now they wanted to ensure nothing like the Kepler 442 incident ever happened again. They were scared. Morrison felt no satisfaction at that news. He had not wanted to frighten an entire species. He had just wanted to protect his crew and prevent a war. But the galaxy did not care about intentions. The Talcor would remember this battle. Other species watching from a distance would remember too. Humanity had sent a message written in fire and blood. The message said that humans did not back down. They did not surrender. They would fight impossible odds and find ways to win. The journey back to Earth took another week. The Alexander's engineers got the Defiant's faster-than-light drive working at reduced capacity. They traveled in convoy with the full escort. Morrison used the time to write reports and recommendations. He also wrote personal letters to the families of the 15 crew members who had died. He tried to find words that would give comfort, but every attempt felt inadequate. How do you explain to someone's parents that their child died in a battle that should never have happened? How do you tell them that their sacrifice prevented a war? The words felt empty even when they were true. Amy Brooks found him in his quarters one evening, staring at his unfinished letters. She sat down without asking permission and told him he was not alone. The entire crew felt the weight of what had happened. They had all lost friends. They all carried guilt and grief, but they also carried pride. They had done something remarkable. They had saved countless lives by refusing to give up. That meant something. That mattered. Morrison looked at her tired face and saw the same exhaustion he felt reflected back. Amy was young, but she had aged during the battle. They all had. Combat did that. It burned away innocence and left scars that never fully healed. But she was right. They had accomplished something. 15 had died, but 165 had lived. The colonies were safe. The war had been prevented. He had to believe that was worth the cost. When they arrived at Earth orbit, the Defiant received a hero's welcome. News of the battle had spread. The crew was invited to ceremonies and given medals. Admirals praised their courage. Politicians gave speeches. Morrison hated all of it. He was not a hero. He was just a captain who had tried to keep his crew alive. The real heroes were dead or still recovering in hospital beds. But he attended the ceremonies because that was also duty. He shook hands and accepted praise and said the right things. At night, he still dreamed of ships burning in a star's corona. The peace summit with the Tal Corps happened 2 months later. Morrison was asked to attend as an advisor. He stood in the back of the conference room while diplomats negotiated terms. The Tal Corps sent their High Council members. They were clearly uncomfortable. Morrison could see it in their body language. These were proud predators who had conquered dozens of species. Now they were negotiating with humans as equals. More than equals. They were negotiating from a position of weakness. The terms were favorable to humanity. Open trade. Recognized borders, mutual defense pacts. The Tal Corps agreed to everything. They wanted peace at almost any price. The treaty was signed and broadcast across known space. Other alien species watched and learned. Humanity was not to be trifled with. One ship had defeated a fleet. What could an entire navy do? Morrison received a promotion to Commodore. He was offered command of a battlecruiser. He turned it down. Instead, he requested and received a transfer to training command. He would teach the next generation of officers. He would share what he had learned at Kepler 442. Not the tactics or the technical details, but the important things. Never give up. Protect your crew. Do the impossible because someone has to. The Defiant was repaired and returned to service. The shipyard workers wanted to rename it. They suggested calling it something grand like Valiant or Victorious. Morrison convinced them to keep the original name. The ship had earned its identity through fire. It deserved to keep it. The Defiant sailed again with a new crew and new missions. Morrison heard it became something of a legend. Crew members competed for positions aboard. Serving on the ship that had fought an entire fleet became a point of pride. Amy Brooks made lieutenant commander and requested transfer to the Defiant. She became its first officer under a new captain. Nathan Pierce stayed as chief engineer. He said the ship had too much personality to abandon. Dr. Helen Carter accepted a position at the Naval Medical Academy, but she kept a photo of the Defiant's crew on her desk. The survivors stayed in touch. They had shared something that bonded them deeper than friendship. They had faced death together and come through the other side. 5 years after the battle, Morrison retired from active service. He was 52 and felt 70. The dreams had never stopped. The guilt had not faded. But he had done his duty. He had trained thousands of officers. He had shared his knowledge. He had tried to prepare them for the impossible. Now it was time to rest. He moved to a small house on the coast of Oregon. He spent his days walking on the beach and watching the ocean. Sometimes he would look up at the stars and think about Kepler 442. He wondered if the debris from Kreshtar's flagship had finished falling into the sun. He wondered if anyone remembered the Tal Corps crew who had died following their leader's pride. He hoped someone did. Even enemies deserved to be remembered. On the 10th anniversary of the battle, Morrison received a package. Inside was a flag that had flown on the Defiant during the engagement. It was burned and torn from combat damage. With it was a letter signed by every surviving crew member. They thanked him for bringing them home. They told him that they had lived full lives because of his decisions. They said he was the best captain they had ever served under. Morrison read the letter 3 times and then carefully folded it away with his medals and commendations. The galaxy had changed because of what happened at Kepler 442.